This is the operating system and firewall presentation by Zachary Stassa. The first thing we will be talking about is Windows Server 2019. Windows Server 2019 is based on the Windows 10 version 1809 operating system. Windows Server 2019 has enterprise-specific software pre-installed by default that the regular Windows 10 operating system does not have, such as Active Directory, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, File and Storage, Print Services, and Windows Update Service. Windows Server 2019 has less limitations and hardware than Windows 10 to allow for servers powerful enough to sustain entire companies that have several systems and devices on their network. Windows Server 2019 does not include consumer-oriented programs such as the Windows Store or Cortana that do not have any practical utility to the administration of a network. Here we have some Windows Server 2019 hardening recommendations. The first recommendation is to set password requirements, expirations, and lockouts for users. Password requirements will ensure that users have sufficient enough complexity. Password expirations make it so user passwords have to be reset at regular intervals, and lockouts make it so login attempts are not possible for a period of time after a certain amount of failed attempts. Setting these rules for passwords will make it much more difficult for hackers to crack the passwords of users. The next recommendation is configuring remote access to VPN only to reduce the attack surface hackers have to their disposal. The last recommendation is disabling all services not being actively used, because having more services open and running increases the chances of there being a vulnerability in one of them that could be exploited. The second operating system that we are going to be looking at is Ubuntu 20 long-term support. Ubuntu 20 long-term support is a version of Ubuntu that is going to be supported for 5 years from its release, which after 5 years the next version is released. The long-term support model of operating system releases allows for there to be enough time for developers to patch vulnerabilities and optimize for performance, making it a very, very stable and safe Linux-based option. Ubuntu long-term support can be upgraded to the next long-term support release, while a regular version of Ubuntu needs to be upgraded around 2 times per year. Some hardening recommendations for Ubuntu 20 long-term support are creating a new user to use instead of root, because a system being compromised while root is logged in would be disastrous, since the root user has so much power, and damaging mistakes or accidents can be made while logged on into root are much more likely to occur. Disabling root login from SSH prevents remote logins to the root user. To be safe, having to physically be at the system to log in to root could be an inconvenience, but greatly reduces the risk, as hackers are more likely to try to infiltrate systems over the internet as opposed to a physical breach. Disabling empty passwords is a simple but major step in hardening, as it will require all users to have set passwords to log in, as opposed to being able to log in with just a username. The first firewall we will be looking at is Windows Firewall. Windows Firewall is a built-in application in the Windows operating system that filters and controls connections on the system. Windows Firewall has the ability to set rules for applications in order to regulate their access to connected networks, so applications can be made to have no access to the internet, reducing the chances of some type of vulnerability being exploited. Rules can be created in Windows Firewall to control inbound and outbound traffic, such as blocking connections from specific IP addresses, ports, or websites. This makes it possible to do something such as only approving connections to necessary sites, greatly reducing the risk of someone on the network accidentally opening a nefarious site. Hardening recommendations for Windows Firewall are blocking inbound traffic under Windows Firewall properties to prevent any connection requests from outside the network entering in, helping prevent things such as recon or denial of service attacks by hackers. Creating a rule to prevent PowerShell from accessing the internet, since PowerShell can be used in a variety of attacks, especially since it has the ability to run remotely through Windows Remote Management and is capable of carrying out fileless malware attacks, which are harder to detect than traditional malware attacks. Regularly reviewing settings to ensure applications conform to the firewall rules and have not created their own unique rules, as sometimes applications can build their own rules due to someone forgetting to configure specific settings. The second firewall we are going to be looking at is IP tables. IP tables is a command line based Linux firewall that controls traffic through policy chains. The different chains are input, forward, and output. Input controls any incoming connections. Forward handles connections that are incoming but have a different destination, and output is used to create rules for outgoing connections. IP tables is by default installed on the majority of Linux operating systems. In the event of a connection, IP table scans through its list of rules for a match. Default behavior can be set to handle connections that do not match any rules, so when none of the set rules fit the connection, it will have a default action applied to it. Some of the ways you can handle connections through IP tables are accept, drop, or reject. Accept will let the connection through, while drop and reject both do not allow the connection through. The difference between the two is reject will send back an error to the origin of the connection, while drop will not. Some hardening recommendations for IP tables are given through the following commands. The first one drops null packets, since null packets are often used to gather information about networks from the outside, which could be used by hackers to find what software is running and which version it is to know what vulnerabilities there are to be exploited. The second command, or the second set of commands, log dropped packets, which helps network administration keep track of attempted connections, making it easy to see if there are or have been any attempted attacks on the network. And the last command helps drop fragmented packets to help prevent IP fragmentation attacks, which send fragmented packets that are not possible to assemble, which consumes resources often to the point of disrupting the network. And now here are the references with the end of the presentation.